So I want to go in and set the stage for this story that I'm going to tell you guys today about a way that I chose to color outside the lines. My husband and I got married in September of 2019. And, we, at that time, even though COVID hadn't hit yet, we had elected for a smaller ceremony and just a bigger reception. And that comes with a lot of stress and opinions and family dynamics. And so I was pretty happy when that was over and done with. And we just got to kind of get back to living our normal lives and doing all of those things. We were living together before we got married. And so it wasn't actually a huge change for us when we got married. But I want to fast forward us a little bit. 6 months into our newlywed life, the pandemic happened. And at that time, I was working in an office 3 or 4 days a week, and my husband was in chiropractic school and had internships. And so we were both out of the house a decent amount. And when COVID happened, all of that stopped, and we were just kind of locked up in our house. We were some of the people who followed the guidelines pretty strictly. And so even when things like grocery stores and gyms opened back up, we made the choice to not do those things in an effort to do our part for stopping the spread of the pandemic, in all honesty. So we weren't going to family gatherings. We weren't seeing friends. We were doing things virtually, and we were just trying to navigate being home with each other and figuring out what our careers looked like at that point in time. Also keeping in mind that we were set to go on our honeymoon in April of 2020. And so a month after the pandemic happened, obviously our honeymoon was canceled. It actually got rescheduled 2 times after that, also all getting canceled. And we kind of came to this realization that for sure our honeymoon and potentially the rest of the timeline we had kind of laid out for our life was likely going to have to change. And so we were having a lot of conversations about that and the things we were willing to wait for to see if the pandemic restrictions eased so we could do some of these things that we had in our timeline for ourselves, or if we were going to kind of bypass the things that were being impacted by the pandemic restrictions and just move forward and skipping over some of the things in our timeline. Also, at the same time I got married, I had started with a new therapist, and I was really looking to explore my anxiety more and get a handle on how my past traumas were really influencing me as a human. And so at about the 6-month mark, that combined with COVID really had me starting to look at relationship dynamics differently than I had ever done before, which probably sounds weird coming from a therapist, because I look at relationship dynamics all the time, right? Something in my brain shifted during this time, though. It was not so much about the things you see, the behaviors, choices that people make, I guess. It was this internal shift for me where I was starting to recognize that the belief of, well, their family didn't justify the things that I was putting up with anymore. Have an opinion about that if you will. I just have seen more healthy dynamics amongst people sometimes when they don't share any relation with the people in their life. So in my time in therapy, looking at relationship dynamics, I started to become much more aware of the things and the people, the beliefs, the pressures that were triggering me, making me overly anxious, making me question myself, feel bad about myself. And once I saw them, once I identified them, it was really fucking hard to unsee. And so I wasn't left with a lot of choices once I turned the lights onto that. It's not like you can just turn it off and pretend it's not there. You know what's in the room with you at that point in time. And so I was faced with the decision of, what do I do about that? Do I continue to sacrifice myself, my mental well-being, the things I want in life, how I want to live life just because these people are my family and the expectation is that you keep family in your life. So obviously it's no secret that everybody really approached COVID differently, had different beliefs about it and different beliefs about how politicians were handling it and, the people making the restrictions were handling it. What I did not anticipate was the absolute clear-cut divide that COVID made in a lot of relationships for a lot of different people. So I saw this both with the clients I was working with at that time and in my own life. And I don't know, you have people in your life and you think you know them so well, and then something unprecedented like COVID happens and you see a completely new side of people that you were completely oblivious to before. And again, it's another thing that once you see it, you can't unsee it. And so again, my husband and I followed the restrictions as they were put out. We were trying to do our part. We wanted to protect people the best we could. We didn't want to be responsible for spreading this or spreading misinformation, anything like that. And we ran into close people in our lives who did not feel the same way, who were upset with the restrictions that were put in place and how the government or politicians wanted people to handle these situations. And so they chose to not abide by the same type of restrictions that we did and had different priorities at that time than we did, which is totally fine. It just showed us where their values lie and how they compared to the values that we had. And at that time, I had aging grandparents that I was still interested in seeing regularly and wanting to be a part of their life. And I knew with COVID that they would be even more isolated than they had been. And I wanted to be one of those people that could still see them, be a part of their lives, go visit them, give them company, do what I could to make their time during this experience as positive as it could be. And I'm not here saying like, oh, I'm the reason that they survived the pandemic or I made their experience totally better. I just wanted to be a little piece and do what I could since I was working from home. And it was realistic for me to follow the restrictions without it having a huge impairment on my life. Other people did not feel the same way. So obviously tensions mount with those type of things. I spent a lot of my time in therapy at that point, working to identify what I wanted to do, what I felt was right in my gut, and acknowledging what people around me were doing. Let me just tell you, that is not a fun thing to do in therapy. It's pretty interesting, I guess, thinking back on it now, that I at first had difficulty even identifying what it is that I wanted to do. It was a lot easier for me to identify what felt right for me, but what I wanted to do, the life I wanted to live, the person I wanted to be, the values I wanted to emanate out of me to the people around me. I don't know. It was just, when I reached the conclusion of what I wanted to do and what felt right, when those two merged together, is where I felt like I was starting to get into a sticky situation, some darker waters that I hadn't really been in before. And so I spent a lot of time with my therapist working on, how do I handle pushback from people? How do I deal with feeling uncomfortable even if I was acting in alignment with what I felt was right and what was in line with what I believed? The biggest piece of it for me was I wanted people to understand where I was coming from. I wanted people to know why I was making the choices that I did and understand how I got there. I wanted people to be able to get to the same point that I was at. And it was really difficult for me to accept that, one, it's not my job to explain myself to anybody. Two, I can make a decision if people don't agree with it, don't like it. And three, that the perception of other people really can't dictate my life. And that's so hard. It is so hard when you love and care about people so much, especially when you love and care about people, right? Because, I mean, we want other people to have the same perception of us that we see of ourselves. But I think it becomes more complicated when it's the people that you love and you want in your life, and you so desperately just want them to understand you and support you. And they don't, because they don't get it. And based on their life experiences, they can't understand what you're doing or why you're doing it. It's hard. It's hard. It's hard. It's hard. And I think it was not an easy process for me. I guess that's what I'll say. It was not an easy process for me. I was playing around with the idea of boundaries, what I was going to do, who I was going to implement them with, yada, yada, yada. My husband and I did decide to move up the timeline that we had created for ourselves and for what we wanted our family to look like, which meant we were going to try and start having kids sooner than we had anticipated. Because we couldn't travel like we had wanted to, we figured we're not going to put our entire life on hold for the pandemic. Like, we will just fast forward a little bit and we will figure out traveling later. So I became pregnant that summer of 2020. I don't even know the exact month right now. I'd have to look back on my calendars and figure out my life, but it's not really the point because this isn't about that pregnancy necessarily. So I got pregnant that summer. Super excited. I mean, I have always wanted to be a mom, and so very excited, very giddy. That surreal feeling. If you've ever been pregnant, you just know, like, until you get into the doctor's office and hear that baby's heartbeat, it just, you feel a little crazy. You feel like you're like making something up. But essentially, we went to that first doctor's appointment and there were issues right from jump. And they essentially told me to expect to have a miscarriage, which kind of takes the wind out of your sails, obviously. And so they scheduled us to come back in 2 weeks. So I went in when I was 8 weeks. They wanted me to come back at 10 weeks just to check on things. And so every day for those 2 weeks, just heightened anxiety. I withdrew from people, even though there was a lot of things going on in life that I really mentally should have been a part of. And I just couldn't do it because I was anticipating losing this little life that I was so excited for and so eager to meet. And so I just lived in a state of constant fear for 2 weeks. And I went back to the doctor and they told me that the baby was still alive. But that they had concerns about things, and so that I, really needed to make sure I didn't get sick. I really needed to make sure I didn't get COVID. Essentially telling me I needed to follow the restrictions and have really good boundaries. And something about that doctor saying you need to protect this baby, which I'd already knew, right? Like I was doing all the things you're supposed to do, the prenatals and cutting caffeine and no deli meat and all of the rules, right? And so like when this doctor said like you cannot get sick, everything clicked into place for me. I, at 10 weeks pregnant, knew that my only goal in life at this point was to keep this baby alive and healthy. So setting boundaries, telling people no, didn't matter. I wasn't doing it for myself anymore. I was doing it all for her. So we canceled things. More things than, even the restrictions were telling us we had to cancel at that point in time. We canceled outdoor activities that we had scheduled. We canceled family gatherings that we had. And we didn't tell anybody what was going on at this time because, there's this belief that you're not supposed to tell anybody that you're pregnant until the second trimester, and which is bullshit, honestly. If you want to tell people when you're 4 weeks pregnant, you get to do that. It's your body. It's your baby. Your choice, essentially. We chose not to because I did not want to have the conversation of, hey, I'm pregnant. Hey, we lost a baby. It was just not something I wanted to do at that time. So we chose to just withdraw from these events and not really tell anybody what was going on, hoping that our family would give us the benefit of the doubt, which some did. I would say some didn't. Not that they would ever explicitly say that, But there was definitely repercussions from us choosing to not go to those events. And to be completely honest, even looking back on them now, I would do the exact same thing. I would still not give an explanation. I would still not go to those events because it wasn't about me and it wasn't about them. It was all about my daughter at that point in time. So we made it out of those, scary first 4 weeks. When we got to the 12-week mark, I had another scan and they said, yep, everything's been a fluke. Stay healthy still. But everything's good. And so in my head, I had just been massively stressed out for a month for no reason, but we survived it. And so again, I started to lax on boundaries when people were asking me to do things, even if it wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do or following the restrictions for COVID the way that I wanted. I flexed because that's what felt important at that time. Fast forward some weeks, I get into 20 weeks and we learned that there are, in fact, issues with the baby. And the doctor told me that I needed to act as if I was immunocompromised because if I got sick, I'm going to pause for a second, rewind a little bit. At that point in time, we're in like fall, maybe early winter 2020. And so there's not a lot of research about how COVID is impacting pregnant women or babies in utero. And so they didn't know what to tell me. You could tell when they were talking to me that they were scared, that they didn't have information, that they were on edge. But my doctor basically told me, you need to act as if you're immunocompromised because if you get COVID, we don't know if you will survive. We don't know if the baby will survive. Act as if you're immunocompromised. People had a hard time with this one. People continued to expect us to be able to attend normal things, holidays, birthdays, gatherings, hanging out on Sunday for dinner. Like, it was not feasible for us unless I was willing to risk my life or my child's life. And when you look at things from that perspective, that people are still pushing you because they can't understand the risk, it makes things so crystal clear. If you explain something to people, they don't ask follow-up questions, but then they get upset with you. It's very crystal clear that they are only thinking about themselves. And so people really wanted me at this time to tune into how they were feeling and taking care of them. And again, since that 10-week mark, my only goal was protect this baby. She cannot do it for herself. Protect this baby. This is my one job on this planet. If I fail at everything else, my one job is to keep this baby healthy and safe inside of me because it's my body that she's using right now to grow. And so that meant that I had to use my body and keep it safe for her. So many people thought this was a personal attack on them. So many people thought it was something about them that they were doing that they could change to make me be around them more. And I guess on some level, it is personal, right? Like, I'm not going to be like, oh, none of this was personal and, none of it had anything to do with you. However, when push came to shove, if I had to choose between anyone else and my daughter, there is no doubt in my mind. It is my daughter every single day of the week. And I won't ever justify or explain that. We did tell people that if they followed restrictions for 2 weeks, which was the guidelines at that time, masked, tested, all of the things, that we could see them. But people didn't want to make those type of sacrifices for us. And they just couldn't get it. And COVID wasn't scary to them because they're relatively healthy and they didn't have these factors, which is fine, right? Like, I don't want to take anybody's health away from them. And we all do the best we can and make the choices that are best for ourselves in those moments. I had repercussions from my actions too, right? Me telling people, nope, I won't be around you. I need to protect this baby, putting her above everything else. There was repercussions to that. And again, not to say I would do anything differently, but I was alone. I was alone for a lot of my pregnancy. I was alone during a lot of COVID, and not just because I was working from home. My husband was doing internships and, going here and there and doing the things he needed to do. So he was getting out of the house. I was home a lot by myself, isolating to keep myself and the baby safe and healthy. And I did it anyways. I did not flex on those boundaries. The one goal I had was protect this baby. Protect this baby. Everyone else can leave your life, but this baby, she is everything. It sounds extreme, and maybe it was extreme. Maybe different parents would handle it differently. Looking back, I still can't say I would handle it differently. I would still put her health and well-being above everything. By doing this, by setting these boundaries, by not flexing, by not showing up for holidays, by not showing up for birthdays, by being in my own isolation and depression area, like I was going to say pit, but it didn't even feel like a pit. I felt like I was in a bubble. I felt like I was in a bubble, and I put myself there, and I take full accountability for that. Doing that massively changed relationships in my life. I viewed people differently. I gained so much clarity about the people who were good for me in my life, in my mental health, and the people who were not. The people who were givers and the people who were takers. The people who knew me and understood me and the people who didn't. The people who could show up for me when I was struggling and the people who couldn't set their own stuff aside. And that is honestly, it's liberating and painful all at the same time. And I don't know how to explain it other than that. It's so freeing to see people clearly, to understand who people are. And it is so incredibly painful to know that people aren't good for you when you want them so bad in your life. And so whether good or bad, like I couldn't unsee people. I couldn't unsee the people that were not supportive and who could only think about their own needs at that given time. And so I had to make the choice to structure my life differently. I had to start managing my feelings differently. I couldn't turn to certain people that I chose to vent to at other points in my life and turn to for support. I couldn't turn to them anymore. I had to manage my own feelings differently, and I had to find different people to rely on or just rely on myself. Because at the end of the day, I needed to do things differently for myself because my daughter was using my body to survive. Obviously, now that we're in 2024, we approach COVID very differently than we did 4 years ago. For good or bad, it just seems like it's part of our life now. However, COVID, being pregnant during COVID, the actions of the people at that time caused me to see the world differently. It is what it is. Looking back on the boundaries I set, on the way that I saw people, I kind of wish I had that earlier in life. I wish I was able to look at friends and family members, employers differently earlier, because I would have made a lot of different choices in life. I would have started taking care of myself a lot earlier in life. I would have set boundaries and had expectations for people and known that was okay and that didn't make me needy or demanding. It just meant that I had clarity on myself and my own needs. I think my world, my life, my everything would have been a lot different. And since COVID, since being pregnant with my daughter, I have maintained a lot of those boundaries. I was really strict on them, obviously, when I was pregnant. We ended up losing my daughter when I was 30 weeks pregnant. And even after that, when I was deep in my grief, I kept my boundaries and my isolation bubble still really intact. And slowly over time, I have looked at flexing my boundaries, changing, giving more flexibility where I feel like it's beneficial for both me and that other person. But I haven't completely gone back to what I was, how I lived life and how I approached people. The freedom I gave people to hurt me, I have not gone back there. And I don't don't think I will. I hope I don't. Valuing myself, taking care of myself, I have grown so much as a person. And obviously, I've had a bunch of different life events that have happened too, and that have made me grow that way. But I think when I was able to allow myself to believe that I have worth and that how I feel affects how I show up in the world, I was able to change. I was able to be more in line with the person that I wanted to be. And you know what? Not everybody's okay with that. And I'm having to make peace with that every day, that not everybody is okay with the person that I am or want to be. And that's okay. I can have hope that maybe one day they will be able to see me and accept me. And right now, how I feel matters more than a lot. So I guess what I hope people can take away from this story, from this experience I had, is that you are so valuable and you don't need to wait for something extreme or traumatic or another person to be dependent on you to start valuing yourself and living a life in accordance with that. The world changes when we take care of ourselves. How we feel about it, how we interact with it, what we can give to the world changes when we are taken care of. Humans are so valuable. And honestly, a lot of us treat ourselves like shit. I still do, time to time. And I recover from it a lot more quickly. You can survive a lot of things. You can survive people being mad at you. You can survive people not understanding you or not knowing your side of the story. I don't know that we ever really survive or thrive when we're not taking care of ourselves, though.